What would you do if the person you worked for, the one who trusted you, confided in you, might also be the reason your family was torn apart? Claire Dawson walked into Pierce Technologies carrying a secret identity and a wound she had hidden for years. She came seeking the truth about her father's downfall, but instead found herself drawn into a world of power, betrayal, and an unexpected bond with the very man she thought was her enemy. When the truth began to surface, she faced an impossible choice: protect her heart, or risk it all to bring justice into the light. If it were you, could you confront the past without losing yourself in the present? Stay with us for this deeply human story of loss, courage, and redemption. If you find this story touching, comment 1. If you think this video needs improvement, comment 2. Now, let's step into Claire's world on the day everything quietly began to change. Close the door. Claire, I'm not letting you go today. Alexander Pierce didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The low timbre carried through the glass-walled office like a stone dropped into still water, rippling all the way to where Claire Dawson stood. Her hand, still holding the silver doorknob, tightened just slightly, just enough to leave faint crescent marks on her palm. She turned. Alex was behind his desk, the late morning light pouring in from the floor-to-ceiling windows, framing him against a skyline of rain-softened clouds. From here. Puget Sound looked calm, its surface brushed by a fine September drizzle. Seattle was wearing its usual gray coat, but his eyes, steel blue, were the kind of cold that had nothing to do with weather. It wasn't the words that made her pulse quicken. It was the certainty in them. He didn't say, "Please stay." He said, "I'm not letting you go." The room smelled faintly of fresh coffee. Sumatra dark roast from the break room on the 45th floor, and the faint hum of the air system filled the space between them. In another life, in another story. This could have been a moment of intimacy, but for Claire, this was dangerous ground. She'd been careful for weeks, slipping into this world of pressed suits and silent elevators, wearing the skin of a woman who belonged here. The truth was, she didn't. When she'd first seen Alexander Pierce, it was from a distance. Her first morning. She arrived earlier than most, but not earlier than him. She'd watched from the hallway as he walked in, coat collar turned up against the drizzle, nodding briefly to the security guard. No wasted words, no hesitation. He disappeared into his office as if the rest of the building were just a set piece around him. Now, standing here with his eyes fixed on her, she thought of the 3 years that had led to this moment. 3 years of building a false history. 3 years of learning how to speak without letting the old bitterness bleed through. 3 years since she buried her father. Michael Dawson, a man whose quiet dedication to Pierce Technologies ended with a letter of termination and a chain of events she'd never forgiven. They'd told her Alex had signed the decision, that he'd read her father's record like another line on a spreadsheet and moved on without a second thought. But when she looked at him now, she couldn't read that kind of man in the set of his jaw. She could read something else: control, yes, but also weariness, the kind that isn't born in boardrooms. Claire stepped fully into the office, letting the door click shut behind her. "You needed something?" she asked, keeping her voice even. For a moment, Alex didn't answer. He stood, walked around the desk, and stopped just a few feet away. The faint scent of cedar and rain clung to him, a cologne chosen by someone who didn't need to impress, only to remind the room he was in it. "I need you to stay on this floor for the rest of the day," he said. "No early departures, no passing things off." It was an odd request, and he must have seen the question in her eyes. "We've got an overseas call with Tokyo late this afternoon, and a matter I'd rather discuss in person." His gaze lingered a beat too long, as if he were searching for something beneath her professional mask. Outside, the rain picked up, tapping against the glass. Claire glanced toward the window, grateful for the excuse to look away. Seattle in the rain was one of the few constants in her life, steady, inevitable, almost comforting. She thought of her mother back in Spokane, probably standing at the kitchen counter with her second cup of coffee, wondering if Claire was eating well, if she was making friends in the big city. Maggie Dawson didn't know about the real reason her daughter had come here. No one did. Her life here was a careful equation, each piece balanced so the truth never tipped it over. But equations have variables, and Alexander Pierce was proving harder to solve than she'd expected. He stepped back toward his desk. "That's all for now. We'll speak again later." Claire nodded, her hand already on the doorknob again. But something in his tone, something that wasn't in the words, stopped her. "Not letting you go today." It echoed as she walked back to her own workspace, a neat corner with a view of Queen Anne Hill. She opened her laptop, fingers resting on the keys, without typing. Why today? Why now? She'd been here 6 weeks, blending in, keeping to herself, never giving him reason to look too closely. Yet now, she felt the weight of his attention like a hand on her shoulder. She told herself it was nothing, just another day in the high floors of Pierce Technologies. But somewhere deep down, she knew better. By 11 a.m., the drizzle had thickened into steady rain. Claire carried a stack of reports to the copy room, passing the break room where 2 senior managers whispered over paper cups of coffee. They fell silent when they saw her, offering polite smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. It reminded her in this building, smiles were just another kind of armor. Back at her desk, she opened her top drawer. Beneath the pens and paper clips was a thin manila folder, her father's, the one she'd kept hidden, even from herself, on days she needed to forget. She touched the edge of it, then shut the drawer again. Not now. From his office, Alex watched her through the glass. He didn't know why he'd asked her to stay. Not entirely. But he trusted his instincts, and they were telling him that Claire Dawson was not what she seemed. He turned back to the window. The rain blurred the skyline, softening the sharp lines of the city, making it harder to tell where one building ended and the next began. Some truths are like that, he thought. Hard to see until you're close enough to feel the edges. By late afternoon, the rain would stop, and by evening, something would happen that would make both of them question everything they thought they knew about the other. The rain hadn't let up by the time Alex left his office that afternoon. Claire heard the muted click of his shoes crossing the carpeted hallway, the way conversations seemed to pause when he passed. In a building filled with people used to success, Alexander Pierce carried a kind of gravity that made the air feel heavier around him. If you'd only read about him, you'd know the usual founder of Pierce Technologies, self-made billionaire, the man who'd turned a small group of engineers into a multinational empire in less than 20 years. But in person, there was more than headlines. There was the precision in the way he buttoned his suit jacket, the way he seemed to listen even when he wasn't looking directly at you. At 45, Alex's life was measured in minutes and miles. His day began before dawn, running along the quiet streets of Queen Anne, rain or shine. By 6:30 he was in the gym. By 7:15, showered and dressed in suits, tailored so subtly that only someone who knew fabric could tell they weren't off the rack. By 8:00 he was on the 45th floor, coffee in hand, scanning the city as if it were a chessboard. Few knew much about his childhood. Those who did rarely spoke of it. He'd grown up in Montana, where winters were long and summers short. His mother, Evelyn Pierce, was the warmth in the cold, until the accident on Highway 89 when Alex was 14. A truck hit their car in the early dusk of November. She didn't make it past the first night in the hospital. From then on, he lived with his father, a man who ran his own construction firm and believed sentiment belonged in novels, not in life. By 17, Alex had learned not to expect comfort from anyone. He carried that lesson into adulthood, trading softness for control, trust for strategy. Even now, people often mistook his silence for arrogance, but those who'd been in his closest circle, what little of it existed, knew he kept his distance for a reason. Claire didn't know all of this yet, but she noticed the details. The way his desk was always clear at the end of the day, not a paper out of place. How he carried a pen with a fine gold clip, not because he needed it, but because it had been his mother's gift when he got into college. How he paused sometimes at the western windows, eyes on the sound, as if counting the ships in the water was a private ritual. These observations found their way into her thoughts at odd times, while she was making copies. While she was sorting through email threads, she'd remind herself not to read too much into them. She wasn't here to understand Alexander Pierce. She was here to uncover the truth. That afternoon, as she was dropping a report on his desk, she caught sight of something unexpected, a photo frame half hidden behind his monitor, tilted just enough for her to see the edges. A boy, maybe 14, with unruly hair and a reluctant smile, standing next to a woman with a scarf around her neck. The picture had the warm, faded tones of a life lived before smartphones. Claire didn't linger, but the image stayed with her. By early evening, the rain shifted into a fine mist. Alex was still in his office, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, studying a set of schematics spread across the desk. The city's lights were beginning to glitter in the wet streets below. "Long day," Claire said softly, setting a fresh cup of coffee at the corner of his desk. He glanced up. "They all are." Then, after a pause, "Thank you." It was such a small thing, 2 words, but for a man who rationed them like currency, they carried weight. Walking back to her desk, Claire wondered again how much of what she'd been told about him was true. The Alex she'd imagined before stepping into this building was a ruthless executive who signed lives away without looking back. The Alex she saw now still carried that ruthlessness, but wrapped around something else, something she couldn't name yet. She opened her laptop and tried to focus on the budget forecast in front of her, but her eyes drifted to the reflection in the glass partition. Alex leaning over his desk, hand resting against his temple, lost in thought. It struck her, in that moment, that maybe he wasn't just the man she'd come here to confront. Maybe he was also a man carrying his own kind of unfinished story. The clock read 7:15 when she finally shut her computer. Most of the floor was empty now, the hum of the HVAC the only sound. She gathered her bag, but before she reached the elevator, Alex's voice came again from behind her. "Claire." She turned. His expression was unreadable, but his tone was softer than it had been that morning. "Tomorrow. Come in a little earlier. There's something I'd like you to see." She didn't ask what. But as she stepped into the elevator and the doors closed, she realized her curiosity had just tied itself tighter to this man and whatever it was he wanted to show her. And that curiosity, she knew, could be the very thing that would undo her. The morning air was crisp, the kind that hinted at autumn even though summer hadn't fully left. Claire's heels clicked softly against the polished lobby floor as she arrived half an hour earlier than usual. Alex's request from the night before replayed in her mind like a loop. "There's something I'd like you to see." She hated that it stirred more curiosity than caution. On the 45th floor, the building still felt asleep. The reception lights were dim, the hum of the elevators fading into silence. Claire set her bag down at her desk, then glanced toward Alex's office. The door was ajar. She hesitated just long enough to feel the pull between what she was here to do and what she might be stepping into. "Come in," his voice called, low and steady. Inside. Alex stood by the far wall, where a framed photograph of the company's early days hung. A much younger Alex was in the center, flanked by a small team of engineers, their smiles wide, their clothes casual. "This," he said, gesturing toward the photo, "was Pierce Technologies 15 years ago. 10 of us in a rented space in Fremont. 2 computers barely holding together, and an idea that seemed impossible at the time." Claire stepped closer. Her eyes scanned the faces. One of them, third from the left, made her heart clench. Michael Dawson. Her father. Alex didn't seem to notice her reaction. Some of those people are still here. Others. Life had different plans for them. Claire forced herself to breathe evenly. "Why are you showing me this?" His gaze stayed on the photo, because sometimes we forget how we started. And I don't want to forget. It wasn't the answer she'd expected, and it rattled her more than she wanted to admit. They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the city faint through the glass walls. Claire felt the weight of her father's smile staring back at her from the photograph, a frozen reminder of the man he'd been before everything unraveled. Part of her wanted to ask right then what Alex remembered about Michael Dawson. But the timing was wrong, the air too fragile. By mid-morning, the floor had filled with the rhythm of a normal workday, phones ringing, printers warming up, the scent of fresh bagels drifting from the break room. Claire buried herself in scheduling calls, answering emails, organizing files that didn't need organizing, anything to keep from replaying that moment in front of the photograph. But her mind wandered anyway. At noon, she slipped out for lunch, walking the familiar few blocks to Cary Park. The benches were damp from last night's rain, the view of the city framed by shifting clouds. She unwrapped a simple peanut butter sandwich, a habit from years when it was all she could afford, and let the quiet settle over her. She thought of her mother in Spokane, still keeping Michael's old toolbox in the garage, as if he might need it again someday. She thought of Alex, and how easily he could have mentioned her father's name this morning, but hadn't. The truth was a tricky thing. She'd built her entire reason for being here on the belief that Alex was responsible. But standing in front of that photograph, she'd seen something, maybe pride, maybe nostalgia, that didn't fit with the man she'd imagined. And that mismatch was dangerous. When she returned, Alex was on a call, his tone clipped but calm. He motioned for her to wait. "Yes, I understand," he said into the phone. "But the numbers don't lie. We need a meeting with finance before the week is over." Finance. That meant Vivian. Claire felt an involuntary chill. She'd read about Vivian Pierce in old press releases, brilliant, poised, and someone who played to win, no matter the cost. If she was back in Seattle, the air in this building would change. Alex hung up, leaned back in his chair. "We've got a board dinner tomorrow night," he said. "Vivian will be there." There it was. The name dropped like a stone. "I'd like you to join us," he added. "It'll give you a sense of the bigger picture." Claire nodded slowly. She didn't trust herself to speak without revealing too much. But inside, her pulse quickened not from anticipation, but from the instinctive warning that came whenever something from the past moved closer. She gathered her notes for the afternoon meeting, but her mind was already elsewhere, calculating. Vivian Pierce at the same table, the woman who, if Claire's hunch was right, might hold the real key to her father's fall. And now, Alex had just opened the door for her to be there. She would go, she would watch, And maybe, just maybe, she'd find the crack in the story she'd been chasing for 3 years. The rain had stopped by the time Claire stepped out of the taxi in front of the Columbia Tower Club. Seattle's tallest building rose into the night sky, its glass panels catching the last traces of sunset. The air smelled faintly of wet asphalt and autumn leaves. She smoothed the front of her navy dress, the one she'd chosen carefully that afternoon. Not too formal, not too casual enough to blend in without drawing attention. Inside, the elevator whisked her up to the 75th floor. As the doors opened, she stepped into a world of soft jazz, low conversation, and the muted clink of silverware. Alex was already there, speaking with 2 board members near the window. He caught her eye almost immediately and motioned her over. "Claire," he said, his tone warm but measured. "Glad you could make it." She nodded, offering a polite smile to the older men beside him. Both looked like they'd stepped out of a financial magazine, impeccable suits, watch faces gleaming under the light. It was then she noticed her. Vivian Pierce. Vivian was standing near the bar, a glass of white wine in hand, her posture effortless. She wore a charcoal-sheath dress that looked as if it had been tailored for her alone, her blonde hair swept into a smooth twist. When her gaze swept the room and landed on Claire, it lingered just long enough to register something. Alex led Claire over. "Vivian, this is Claire Dawson, my executive secretary." Vivian's smile was polite, but her eyes ice blue, sharp, held a glint that felt like both curiosity and warning. "Claire," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "I've heard Alex mention you." Claire kept her own expression neutral. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Dinner was served in a private dining room overlooking the city. The skyline glittered against the dark water of the Sound, and the Space Needle shone like a beacon in the distance. Claire found herself seated between a board member she barely knew and Vivian herself. Alex was across the table, engaged in conversation about quarterly projections, but his gaze occasionally flicked toward them. Vivian sipped her wine before speaking. "How long have you been working for my brother?" "Almost 2 months," Claire replied. "And before that, an executive assistant role at a smaller firm." Vivian nodded as if filing the information away. "Alex doesn't usually keep assistants for long. He's particular." The courses came and went: seared salmon, roasted vegetables, a chocolate torte that looked too perfect to eat, but the real substance of the evening wasn't on the plates. Vivian's questions were careful, wrapped in casual conversation. Where did Claire grow up? Did she have family in Seattle? Was she enjoying the work? Each one was harmless on its own. Together, they felt like a net being drawn tighter. Claire answered in measured tones, weaving half-truths into an unremarkable tapestry. She knew better than to give Vivian anything she could pull on later. At one point, Vivian leaned closer, her voice low enough that only Claire could hear. "Seattle can be unforgiving if you're not careful about who you trust." Claire met her gaze. "I'll keep that in mind." The corner of Vivian's mouth lifted, though it wasn't exactly a smile. "I'm sure you will." After dinner, as guests drifted toward the lounge for coffee, Alex approached. "How was it?" Claire glanced toward Vivian, now engaged in animated conversation with another board member. "Interesting," she said. Alex studied her face for a moment, as if deciding whether to ask more. Instead, he offered, "Let's get you back to your place. It's been a long day." The ride down in the elevator was quiet, the city lights flickering through the glass as they descended. Claire watched their reflections, his tall, composed frame next to her, smaller, tense one. She thought of her father in that old photograph, standing beside a young Alex. She thought of Vivian's sharp, assessing gaze. It felt like the edges of her two worlds, her fabricated present and her buried past, were inching closer to colliding. When the doors opened, Alex turned to her. "You handled yourself well tonight." "Thank you," she said. But as she stepped out into the cool night air, she knew this wasn't over. Vivian Pierce hadn't just met her tonight, she'd measured her. And somewhere behind that polished smile, Vivian was already deciding what to do with what she'd found. Tomorrow, Claire would discover that Vivian's version of curiosity came with a sharp edge, and it was already pointed in her direction. Claire sensed it the moment she stepped onto the 45th floor the next morning. Something in the air had changed. The usual hum of keyboards and muted phone calls felt sharper, as if everyone was aware of some undercurrent she couldn't quite name. Her eyes instinctively flicked toward Alex's office door, closed, blinds half drawn. She set her bag down and powered on her laptop, but her mind kept drifting back to the dinner, to Vivian's measured gaze and carefully chosen words. At 9:15, the door to Alex's office opened. Vivian stepped out. No coat, no bag, just a folder tucked under her arm. She moved past Claire's desk with the kind of ease that came from knowing she belonged everywhere. "Good morning," Vivian said, her voice light. "Morning," Claire replied, keeping her tone even. Vivian's smile was polite, but it lingered a fraction too long, as if to remind Claire that last night hadn't been an accident, it had been an introduction. When Claire entered Alex's office minutes later with the day's schedule, he was standing by the window, coffee in hand. "How's your morning?" he asked. "Quiet," she said. He glanced over, as if weighing whether to add something, then shook his head. "We'll have a working lunch today. Just us. I'll explain later." Claire nodded, but curiosity pricked at her. Alex wasn't a man who explained later, he was a man who scheduled, planned, and anticipated. By noon, rain had returned, streaking the glass with silver threads. Alex's lunch order was simple turkey sandwich, black coffee. Claire ate a salad at her desk, the dressing in a small cup on the side, a habit she'd kept since her student days to make meals last longer. When he finally called her in, there was no food on his desk, only the folder Vivian had carried earlier. "I want you to help me sort through this," he said. "It's from finance. Vivian brought it in this morning." Claire kept her expression neutral. Of course. They worked in quiet rhythm for nearly an hour, reviewing budget lines, cross-checking vendor contracts. Nothing unusual until Claire noticed a section marked Special Allocations. The amounts weren't massive in the context of the company's scale, but the recipients, they tugged at her memory. Non-profits she'd heard of, some barely more than a P.O. box. "Is this standard?" she asked lightly. Alex looked up. "Not exactly. Some of these are legacy commitments from the early days. I've been meaning to review them." There was a pause just long enough for her to wonder if he knew more than he was letting on. Later that afternoon, while Alex was in a video call, Claire pulled up the public records for one of the nonprofits. Its registered address matched an old property owned by a holding company linked to Vivian. A thread had appeared. She sat back in her chair, heartbeat steady but strong. Pull it, and something might unravel, but threads could also lead straight into traps. At 5:00, Alex stopped by her desk. "Don't stay too late tonight," he said. "You've been putting in a lot of hours." She smiled faintly. "I will." But when he left for a meeting downstairs, she opened the Special Allocations file again, snapping quick photos with her phone. Each image felt like a small act of defiance and a step closer to the edge. As the office emptied and the lights dimmed, Claire shut down her computer and slipped on her coat. The rain had eased to a mist, the kind that clung to hair and lashes. Walking toward the elevator, she thought about how easily Vivian had walked through this floor, how comfortable she was in Alex's world, and she thought of the nonprofits in that folder, their names like faint echoes in her mind. Tomorrow, she would start pulling at the thread, and she had no idea just how quickly it would pull back. The next morning, Claire arrived even earlier than usual. The building was nearly empty, the air still carrying that faint blend of paper, coffee, and rain that seemed to live in its walls. She powered on her laptop and opened the first image from the folder she'd photographed. One by one, she began tracing the nonprofits, checking public filings, property records, and the occasional buried news clipping. The pattern took shape slowly, like ink spreading through water. Each organization had received modest donations, nothing headline-worthy, but their addresses, directors, and bank connections formed a web that circled back, again and again, to shell companies tied to Vivian Pierce. Claire sat back, staring at the screen. She knew enough to understand that this wasn't simply a matter of misplaced charity. These were channels, quiet, deliberate, where money could move unseen. At 8:05, Alex stepped off the elevator. He paused briefly at her desk. "You're in early." "Just trying to get ahead," she said, clicking her screen to a calendar. He studied her for a beat longer than necessary, then nodded and went into his office. By mid-morning, she had a list of 7 entities linked to Vivian. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was a thread worth holding on to. The question was how to pull without Alex realizing, and without Vivian noticing until it was too late. Her phone buzzed. An internal message from the receptionist, "Vivian Pierce, is here to see you." Claire's stomach tightened. Vivian never came to see her. Vivian arrived in a cloud of subtle perfume and composure, setting her designer bag on the edge of Claire's desk. "Alex in?" she asked casually. "In his office?" Vivian didn't move right away. She glanced at the neat row of files on Claire's desk, then back at her. "You've settled in quickly. That's rare here." Claire smiled politely. "I try to be useful." "Oh, I'm sure you are." The way Vivian said it made the words sound less like a compliment and more like a quiet reminder that usefulness could be temporary. After Vivian disappeared into Alex's office, Claire's hands moved almost without thinking. She slipped her phone into her jacket pocket and walked toward the stairwell, taking the stairs down one level to the legal department. John Kessler, the in-house counsel, was pouring coffee into a mug shaped like a baseball glove. "Morning," he said. "Morning. Quick question. Do you know if there's a protocol for reviewing older charitable contributions?" "The small ones, from years back." He raised an eyebrow. "Why, Alex asked me to get familiar with them. I just want to be sure I'm looking at the right records." John shrugged. "Half of that stuff runs through finance before it ever touches legal. If you want clean copies, start there. But be careful, those files can get political." Back at her desk, she found Alex alone. Vivian was gone, but the air felt charged, like a room just after lightning. He looked up. "She give you any trouble?" "No," Claire said. "Just stopped by." He gave a short nod. "We have the Tokyo call in 20 minutes. Can you bring the contracts?" The call was uneventful, but Claire's mind kept drifting. She couldn't stop thinking about the list on her computer, the way the lines connected in her head. It felt like she was holding a map that only she knew how to read. After the call, Alex leaned back in his chair. "You've been quiet today. Just focused," she said. He studied her for a moment, then said, "Good. But don't lose yourself in the details. Sometimes you miss the bigger picture." She wondered if he meant it as advice or a warning. That night, long after most of the building had emptied, Claire sat with her coat over the back of her chair, scrolling through another set of records. One of the nonprofits on her list had been dissolved last year, its remaining assets transferred to a private trust, one that Vivian controlled. She closed her eyes. Her father's name, the pain of his last months, the unanswered questions, all of it pressed against her like a tide. This wasn't just about hidden money. It was about power, and power like that didn't vanish on its own. She shut down her laptop and reached for her phone, hesitating just a moment before dialing a number she hadn't called in years. When the voice on the other end answered, she said softly, "I might have something you'll want to see, but we'll have to meet in person." She didn't know it yet, but that call would set off a chain of events that neither she nor Alex or even Vivian would be able to stop. Claire arrived at the cafe in Capitol Hill 20 minutes early, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had already cooled. The place was small, tucked between a bookstore and a florist, its walls lined with mismatched shelves of used novels. Rain tapped gently on the windows, blurring the view of the street outside. She chose a corner table, back to the wall. From here, she could see the entrance and the counter, an old habit from years of never quite feeling safe. At exactly 8 hours, a man in his late 50s stepped inside. He wore a wool coat, damp from the rain, and carried a leather briefcase, worn smooth at the edges. "Claire Dawson," he asked quietly when he reached her table. She nodded. "Thank you for coming. Mr. Lang." Lang had been an investigative reporter for the Seattle Ledger before taking early retirement. He still freelanced, especially when a tip promised more than a routine corporate puff piece. "You said you had something worth seeing," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. Claire pulled a small envelope from her bag and set it on the table. 7 nonprofits, all linked to holding companies tied to Vivian Pierce. The donations look clean on paper, but the money moves again within weeks to private trusts. Lang opened the envelope, flipping through the printed records she'd assembled. His eyes narrowed slightly. "You've done your homework. I need this to see daylight," she said, "but it can't trace back to me, not yet." He looked up, studying her face. "If I dig, I'll find where this came from." "Are you sure you want me to follow the trail?" Her fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "Yes." The bell over the door chimed, and Claire's pulse jumped before she even looked. Vivian Pierce. She was dressed for a meeting, her heels clicking against the wood floor as she walked toward the counter. Claire's mind raced. Capitol Hill was large, but Vivian being here now felt like more than coincidence. Lang noticed her reaction. Problem? Just someone from work. Vivian turned from the counter, coffee in hand, and her gaze swept the cafe. For the briefest moment, their eyes met. Claire forced herself to look past her as if she were just another stranger. Vivian left without approaching, but the air at the table felt heavier. Lang leaned in. "If she's involved in what you've found, she'll know someone's pulling at the thread." "I know," Claire said. "That's why we don't have much time." Lang nodded, tucking the envelope into his briefcase. "I'll start tonight. But if you hear anything, any sign, they suspect you call me first." After he left, Claire stayed a few minutes longer, pretending to read the menu on the wall. Her heart was still settling from the jolt of seeing Vivian. She knew how people like Vivian operated. Sometimes the most dangerous move wasn't to attack, but to watch and wait. Back at the office, Alex was already in. He glanced up as she walked in. "Everything okay this morning?" "Fine," she said, hanging up her coat. He hesitated, as if sensing there was more, but didn't press. Instead, he slid a folder across his desk. "I need you to coordinate with finance on these reports. Vivian wants them by end of day. The name landed heavier than usual. Throughout the day, she caught glimpses of Vivian passing in the hallway, talking with department heads, once standing by the window in Alex's office with her back to the door. By late afternoon, Claire's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Soon." No name. But she didn't need one. Lang. She locked her screen and slipped the phone into her pocket, forcing herself to keep working as if nothing had changed. Tomorrow, she would learn what Lang had already uncovered, and it would change the shape of the game entirely. Claire didn't sleep much that night. The rain against her apartment window was soft, but relentless, matching the rhythm of her thoughts. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Vivian's gaze in the cafe, calm, assessing, like someone marking a target. By morning, her phone buzzed again. "We can't wait. Meet me before work." Lang included an address, an old diner near the waterfront. The place smelled of strong coffee and bacon grease, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes for hours. Claire slid into a booth. The vinyl seat cracked at the seams. Lang was already there, his briefcase beside him, a half-empty mug in front of him. "I dug last night," he said without preamble, "and I found something you need to see." He opened the briefcase and pulled out a thin folder. Inside were copies of internal memos, emails, transaction summaries, signatures. Claire's breath caught. She recognized one of the signatures immediately. Alex's. "They show his approval for at least 3 of those special allocations," Lang said, tapping the page. "The money goes to the nonprofits, then moves into trusts tied to Vivian. The paper trail makes it look like they're both in on it." Claire's first instinct was disbelief. Alex's voice, his steady presence, the way he'd shown her that old photograph of her father, none of it fit with the idea of him knowingly feeding money into something corrupt. But the documents in front of her didn't care about her instincts. "I've seen forged approvals before," Lang continued. "But they'd pass most audits. If they're fake, the person behind them knows exactly what they're doing." Claire closed the folder, her pulse unsteady. "If these are real, it means he's part of it. If they're fake, it means someone's setting him up." Lang finished, "And I'd bet on the second option, but proving it won't be easy." Outside, gulls wheeled over the gray water, their calls sharp in the damp air. Claire stared at them for a long moment. She thought of her father again, how quickly a man's reputation could be dismantled, how little recourse the truth had once the wrong story took hold. She couldn't tell Alex yet, not without knowing for certain. Lang seemed to read her hesitation. "I'll keep digging," he said. "But watch your back. If Vivian suspects you, she won't come straight at you. She'll let you hang yourself with your own rope." Back at the office, Claire moved through her morning tasks on autopilot, scheduling meetings, filtering emails, updating the day's agenda for Alex. He seemed normal, focused on a proposal for a new international partnership, but she caught him glancing at her once or twice, as if sensing something off. Around noon, Vivian appeared again. This time, she stopped at Claire's desk. "Lunch?" Vivian asked. The tone was casual, but the invitation wasn't. Claire forced a small smile. "I've got deadlines today." Vivian tilted her head, studying her. "Another time? Then?" She walked away, but the faint curve of her lips left Claire unsettled. That evening, as the floor cleared out, Claire lingered at her desk, pretending to review a report. In reality, she was memorizing every detail of the special allocations file, committing the amounts, the dates, the supposed approvals to memory. She knew Lang would keep digging. She knew Vivian might already be tightening her net. But what she didn't know, what kept her awake, was whether Alex Pierce was a man she could trust or the final name on her list. Tomorrow, the first real crack in the facade would appear, and it would come from Alex himself. Claire didn't notice Alex behind her until his reflection appeared in the darkened glass of her monitor. She had been so focused on reviewing the final column of figures from the special allocations list that she didn't hear his footsteps. "You've been buried in that file for days," he said quietly. She closed the spreadsheet with one keystroke, just trying to keep things in order. Alex's gaze lingered on her face, searching. "I hope that's all you're doing." The words felt heavier than they sounded. He moved to his desk, but instead of sitting, he rested one hand on the back of his chair. "Claire, there's something I need to tell you," he said, "and it's not going to be easy to hear." Her pulse quickened. For a moment, she thought he might already know about Lang, about the envelope, about every step she'd taken since finding her father's name in that old photograph. "I had a meeting with Vivian this morning," Alex continued. "She suggested you might be distracted, that you're spending too much time on things outside your role." Claire forced herself to meet his eyes. "And you believe her? I don't believe much without proof," he said. "But I've been in this business long enough to know when someone's under a microscope. And right now, Vivian's got you in her sights." The admission caught her off guard. It wasn't an accusation, it was a warning. "Why tell me this?" she asked. "Because I've seen her do this before," he said. "People don't always survive it. Careers don't always survive it." For the briefest moment, his voice softened, almost like the night he'd shown her that old photograph. "I'd rather not see that happen to you." The rest of the day passed in a blur. She processed emails, arranged meetings, answered questions in the same calm voice she always used. But inside, she kept replaying Alex's words. If he was protecting her, why out of basic decency, or because he knew what she might find if she kept pulling at the thread by late afternoon? The sky over Puget Sound had turned the color of steel. Claire was locking her laptop when her phone buzzed again. Lang got something big. Tonight. Usual spot. She hesitated. Going now meant risking questions from Alex if he noticed she'd left in a hurry. But not going meant waiting another day, and every day gave Vivian more time to close whatever gap Claire still had. The cafe in Capitol Hill was quieter than before, the hum of the espresso machine the only sound. Lang was in the same corner booth, but this time he looked uneasy. "This just came to me an hour ago," he said, sliding a USB drive across the table. Internal server logs from Pierce Technologies. The signature files on those approvals. They were copied from other documents, Alex's real signatures, lifted and pasted. Whoever did it covered their tracks well, but not perfectly. Claire's breath caught. So he didn't approve them. Lang nodded. Not directly, but the problem is, the metadata was altered from inside the network. That means someone high up. Vivian. The name didn't need saying. Claire slipped the USB into her bag, feeling its small weight like a stone. "You have to be careful how you handle this," Lang said. "If you confront the wrong person too soon," the bell above the door chimed. Claire didn't turn immediately, but she felt the shift in Lang's expression. "Alex." He walked toward them, his coat still damp from the mist outside. "Claire," he said, his voice low but steady. "We need to talk. Now." Lang looked between them, then stood. "I'll give you two a moment." As he left, Alex slid into the seat across from her. "You've been meeting with a reporter," he said, not a question, but a fact. Claire's hand tightened on the coffee cup. "And you've been having your signature forged." They sat in silence for a beat, the hum of the espresso machine filling the space between them. Finally. Alex leaned forward. If you know that much, then you also know Vivian won't stop until she's finished what she started. So, the question is, are you going to keep digging alone, or are you going to let me in? For the first time, the possibility of an alliance didn't seem impossible. But trusting him now could either save everything or end it all in one move. The boardroom on the 45th floor was already tense when Claire stepped in. Rain streaked the glass behind the long table, and the city below was lost in a silver haze. Alex sat at the head, his expression unreadable. Vivian stood near the window, her arms folded, a faint smile curving her lips. The special allocations meeting had been moved up Vivian's doing. Lang's voice still echoed in Claire's mind. If you're going to use this, do it where everyone can see it. Alex caught her eye for half a second, just enough for her to know he was ready. Vivian started her presentation, her tone smooth, the slides behind her full of figures that looked clean on the surface. These allocations will ensure the stability of our outreach programs, she said, her gaze sweeping the table. As always, every dollar accounted for. Claire waited until the moment Vivian turned to address a board member's question. Then she slid a small flash drive across the table toward Alex. He plugged it in without looking at her. The screen behind Vivian flickered. Her chart disappeared, replaced by Lang's compiled evidence server logs, forged signature files, and the chain of transfers leading straight to her private trusts. A ripple moved through the room. Vivian turned slowly, the calm in her face cracking just enough to show the steel beneath. What is this? Alex's voice was steady. It's proof that the allocations you've been defending are diversions. The signatures attributed to me were forged from our own archives, and the destination accounts, he nodded toward the screen. They belong to you. Vivian laughed once, low. Fabrications. Anyone with a grudge could put this together. Claire spoke for the first time. It's not just numbers. There are witnesses, dates, and one more thing. This isn't the first time. Vivian's eyes narrowed. Claire slid a second folder onto the table. 4 years ago, a senior engineer named Michael Dawson was pushed out after refusing to sign off on a similar transfer. The official record says he resigned. The truth is, he was set up by you. The name landed like a stone in the silent room. Alex's head turned sharply toward Claire. For a moment, his composure cracked. Vivian recovered first. So that's what this is, a personal vendetta dressed up as corporate ethics. Claire met her gaze without flinching. It's justice, and it's overdue. The chairman cleared his throat. We'll need a closed vote. Vivian's smile returned, brittle and thin. You think you've won, but you've made enemies you can't even see. She gathered her papers and walked out, the click of her heels sharp against the polished floor. When the doors closed behind her, the board voted unanimously to remove Vivian from her position pending investigation. Alex didn't celebrate. He just sat back, as if a weight had shifted but not lifted entirely. After the room cleared, only Alex and Claire remained. He looked at her for a long time. Michael Dawson was your father, he said quietly. Claire nodded. I came here to expose what happened to him. I thought you were part of it, and now I know you weren't. But I also know you could have been if you'd looked the other way long enough. Alex leaned forward, elbows on the table. You didn't have to tell me. You could have disappeared after this. I could have, Claire said, but disappearing doesn't heal anything. He studied her, as if weighing the truth in her voice. What happens now? She glanced toward the rain-smeared window. Lang will publish the story. The company will take the hit. People will talk. But maybe someone will think twice before they do this to another family. They left the building together. The rain had stopped, and the city lights shimmered off the wet streets. At the curb, Alex paused. You could stay. We could rebuild this place. Do it right. Claire smiled faintly. Or I could go, and remember that not everyone in those glass towers is the same. He didn't press her. He just said, whatever you choose, thank you for not letting it stay buried. Claire walked a few blocks alone before stopping at a corner cafe. She ordered black coffee, no sugar, and sat by the window. Outside, people hurried past, their reflections blurring in the glass. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was chasing ghosts. Somewhere up there on the 45th floor, Alex Pierce would be facing his own storms, but the truth was out now. And sometimes, that was enough. She took a sip, letting the warmth settle. Justice didn't bring her father back, but it gave his story an ending, and hers a beginning she could choose for herself. This story reminds us that the truth, though often buried under layers of fear and deceit, has a way of finding its way to the surface if we have the courage to seek it. Claire's journey shows that carrying pain in silence can shape who we are, but it doesn't have to define the rest of our lives. For older generations who have lived through seasons of both joy and hardship, it's a reminder that some wounds can only heal when they are acknowledged, and some wrongs can only be righted when someone dares to speak out. It also teaches that trust is not given lightly. It's earned through consistent honesty, even when honesty is hard. Relationships, whether in family, friendship, or work, grow stronger when we choose truth over comfort. And perhaps the most valuable lesson is this: justice does not always mean victory in the public eye. Sometimes it means finding peace in your own heart, knowing you stood on the side of what is right. No matter our age, it is never too late to face the past, to choose integrity, and to let compassion guide our decisions. In doing so, we leave a legacy of courage for those who come after us. Thank you for spending your time with this story. Your support means the world to us. If this journey touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next story. Together, we can keep spreading hope, courage, and kindness.